Hello, I'm John McBride. Thank you for joining me to explore Kumejima. In October 2023, I sailed to Kumejima in Okinawa Prefecture, Japan, as a guest lecturer with Coral Expeditions. Kumejima lies about 100 kilometers due west of Naha, the capital of Okinawa. Our shore excursions with Coral Expeditions included a visit to Hiajo Banta Cliff Observatory. We were accompanied by the director of the Kumejima Museum, who mentioned that a British ship, which had come from Australia, was shipwrecked on the reef we were looking out upon on 9 February 1849. The name of the ship was the Elizabeth and Henry. According to convict records, the Elizabeth and Henry was a wood bark displacing 534 tons and was launched in Sunderland, England in 1845. She sailed 3 times to Australia with convicts, first in the year she was launched with 200 male convicts, again in 1846-7 with 170 female convicts, and the final voyage before the year of the shipwreck was in 1848 with, again, 170 female convicts. Each of these voyages took about 4 months. Helen Menard from the Female Convicts Research Centre published an article about Lydia Blinkhorn, who was one of the female convicts on the Elizabeth and Henry's final voyage to Australia. Allow me to quote Helen's article. As Lydia, young and somewhat pretty looking, wandered the streets of Manchester, engaging in petty theft and traipsing in and out of jail, did she ever contemplate orchestrating a voyage to the Antipodes in the hope of a better life? Could she have imagined that such a life would involve marrying a fellow convict and ultimately mixing with the glitterati of Melbourne society, where her daughter, Lily, proprietor of a successful photographic gallery, married a basso profondo with the Italian Opera Company, described as one of the handsomest men in Melbourne, and many years her junior? And we have here a photo of Lydia's daughter, I beg your pardon, Lily, or Madame de Alba, circa 1888. So I wrote to Helen and mentioned that Coral Expeditions sails to Kumejima. Helen wrote back, "Hi John, thank you for your mail and delight to hear from you. I must admit, I wasn't aware of the fate of the Elizabeth and Henry. Always learning, aren't we all? I have to say it is most heartwarming to know that our women's stories are seeping out into the broader community. Many of their lives were tragic, not always through any fault of their own, but others were able to work through their difficulties and carve out a reasonable life in the colony. Some returned home to the UK, not always for the better. Thank you again for your email, and I trust Lydia's spirit will enjoy the cruise. Best wishes, Helen." I was delighted by that sentiment. I then discovered a letter written by the captain of the Elizabeth and Henry, Captain William J.S. Clark, who was a native of Dublin. It was published in the Argus in Melbourne on Monday, 24 December 1849. Here's the full text, which you can pause and read, but we will examine this in detail. So Captain Clark picked up passengers and cargo in Sydney, Newcastle and Auckland before the return journey via Shanghai to London. He first sailed towards the Northern Mariana Islands. He was bound for Shanghai. He passed Tinian, just south of the most populated island of the Marianas, Saipan. Tinian, of course, was famous for, or is famous for, nuclear weapons delivery, B-29 bombers, Enola Gay, which went to Hiroshima, and Bockscar, which went to Nagasaki. He then passes Saipan, or Saipa, as Captain Clark calls it. Local legend in Saipan says that long ago, their great navigators came upon an island with nothing on it, so they named it both Sei, meaning a voyage, and Pel, meaning empty. So to name this island of Saipan, they named it the Island of the Empty Voyage, which is Sei-Pel in Carolinian. So Captain Clark perhaps was even closer to the proper pronunciation. The captain continues, had squally unsettled weather until the morning of the 9th of February, when we made the Great Lu Chu, which is sort of the Western take on the Chinese pronunciation for Ryukyu, today Okinawa in Japanese. A fine southerly wind springing up. I intended to have passed between the islands of Amikarima and Kumisang. These are the Kerama Shoto, the wonderful natural park of Kerama Shoto Islands, and the Kume Island. No dangers are laid down in Norrie's charts, and the passage appeared clear, the width about 7 leagues. The sea very smooth. Captain Clark was relying on Norrie's nautical tables, first published in 1803. It's been a bestseller ever since, and despite developments in electronic navigation, it remains an essential requirement for anyone learning and practicing astronavigation. Of course, it's been updated since this trip. The charts at the time indicated it was safe to sail to the north of Kume through a 34-kilometre gap with the Kerama group of islands. It was not safe, as a line of coral reef extends from Kume out towards Kerama. The reef is associated with a long stretch of beautiful white sandbars known locally as Hatenohama, which means the beach at the end of the earth, something like that. That's my silky translation. Captain Clark continues, I heard the lookout man cry on the forecastle, broken water right ahead. Mr. Manning unfortunately ordered the helm to be put up, and before I could get out to countermand it, the ship was before the wind and in a few minutes struck on one of the outward patches of the reef, forced herself over it, struck again on several other patches, until she finally lay with her broadside to the main reef. This was about half an hour after high water with a falling tide, so disastrous. So you can see where she was lost on this reef with a falling tide. Stuck on what would become Kumejima's top tourist destination, the Hatenohama. Captain Clark continues. I now had very little hopes of saving the ship, so turned my attention to the boats and arms in case the natives might molest us. My emphasis there. Appalling language, as they appeared on the morning of the 10th, collecting on the reef at low water, over which they carried their canoes, launched them and came on board. They appeared very friendly, asking many questions, but which we could not understand until they fetched one of the mandarins, again my emphasis referring to the Chinese traders, who had a vocabulary of English and Chinese when we got on very well. So Clark refers to the local friendly Ryukyuans who had come to his rescue, in this dreadful word, natives, and Chinese traders as mandarins. Now, in contrast, when a Chinese envoy was shipwrecked in the same location about 60 years before the Elizabeth and Henry, the envoy ensured that a small temple was donated and erected to thank the locals for saving all lives aboard. No such thanks were received from our Captain Clark. Clark was then taken to Naha by an American ship. He writes that the American captain kindly proposed to take me on to Napakang, which is Naha, the capital of Lu Chu. Distant about 70 miles, that's correct, to get assistance from any vessel there. On our arrival at that place, we were kindly received by the mandarins, again, the Chinese traders. On our landing, they assembled in a temple, treated us politely, setting before us many refreshments. I'd argue they were treated like royalty, actually, setting before us many refreshments consisting of tea, sweetmeats, cooked native dishes of fowl and fish, and my emphasis, samsu, a liquor distilled from rice. Of course, this is Okinawa's delicious shochu, which we are able to taste when we visit. Yes, I'd argue that this was royal treatment. He should have been very grateful. Clarke would eventually make his way back to London from Shanghai on a ship called the Duilius, a three-masted bark of 327 tons. Now, the Duilius itself was shipwrecked off the coast of South Australia, Gwich'en Bay, in 1853. This is not the Duilius, but it's a similar bark. This is the Yarn and Carrel, which survived until the 1950s. Today, Kumejima has a population of about 10,000. In the center of the island are the remains of the Uegusku Castle, home to the rulers of the Kume Magiri, which was a petty kingdom. This is prior to the 16th century. Fittingly today, next door to the old castle is the Japan Air Self-Defense Forces 54th AWOCS wing, the Airborne Warning and Control System. Local famous produce includes tiger prawns and umibudo, a type of seaweed with bubbles instead of leaves, quite delicious. And the famous Kumejima weaving called tsumugi, which has a history of over 400 years. The Tsumugi Weaving Pavilion is a visit worthwhile because the pavilion is both museum and a working tsumugi dyeing and weaving factory. My favorite visit is the Uezu residence. It's a well-preserved, very well-preserved, sorry, I'm just missing the title there, Uezu, U-E-Z-U. A very well-preserved traditional Ryukyuan home. You could compare it to the Nakamura home on the Okinawa mainland, but the Nakamuras were farmers. The Uezu were samurai and village headmen, so the house was very important, and for this reason had a number of approaches due to its high status. The approaches were somewhat like a maze, and this maze is called himpun in Okinawan, but the Chinese characters for himpun are the same as for folding screen in Japanese, which is byobu in Japanese. One route is for men and one for women. At ceremonial occasions, the men's entrance would be used. And generally, the himpun was used to protect the home from evil spirits. Enjoy your visit to Kumejima, and remember to take some strolls along the Fukugi tree-lined streets of Kume's villages. Fukugi means happiness tree, and the trees line the maze-like streets of Okinawan villages as protection from typhoons, and you can see the Uezu residence just there. Thank you.